everybody, it's Courtney from Seaside Shadows here. We wanted to make a little video based on our live video with Mr. Colonel Benjamin Tallmadge. We are currently in Litchfield, Connecticut, up in the hills of the northwest portion of the state, and it's absolutely beautiful up here. And if you haven't had a chance to come up here, it's something I highly recommend, specifically during the fall season. The foliage up here in the northwest corner is like no other. And though I'm from Connecticut, I never spent a lot of time in the northwest part growing up. And it wasn't until I was an adult that I really got to appreciate this particular corner of the state. And I came up here a few years back for a book signing for one of my books, Revolutionary War Ghosts of Connecticut. We were going a little further north even from here to a beautiful town called Kent. But as we were driving up there, my husband and I, we started talking about some of the more inspirational and my favorite figures in the book. And one of the people that I had gotten to research and write about was Colonel Benjamin Tallmadge. And when I was talking about him, my husband said, well, maybe after the signing, we can stop in Litchfield, which is where Benjamin Tallmadge ultimately settled after the war, had a beautiful home, started a bunch of merchant enterprises and more, and ultimately came to be buried when he passed away in his 80s. Now, I, of course, said I wanted to stop by. I had never been to Tallmadge's resting place. And so on the way back from Kent, we stopped in Litchfield, drove past where he used to live, and arrived here at East Cemetery. The problem was it was near sunset. And when it's near sunset in a cemetery, it's the witching hour as far as being able to legally be in here and as far as visually being able to find anything. So we drove into the cemetery, parked in what we perceived to be the middle, looked down, find a grave, and realized how big the cemetery was and how difficult it would be in the setting sun to find what we were looking for. So I looked up on a hillside, and all of a sudden I saw a man, or a shadow of a man, standing on the hillside. When I looked at the man, it was evident that he was there, but more in a spectral form than a physical, and I had this warm feeling, and I decided to follow the sight of the man, and I went up to the top of the hill to where I'm standing today. When I got here, the man was no longer visible to my eye, but I looked to my side, and here was the grave of Mr. Benjamin Tallmadge. So I like to think in my heart that that was him guiding me to his stone and to his story, and letting me know that he had known that I had written about him and things of that nature. And it was my first wonderful spiritual experience with Mr. Tallmadge, which also meant something to me. Now, Mr. Tallmadge is a Revolutionary War hero, a spy, a merchant, a Connecticut native. He's so many fabulous things. I'm going to tell you today a bit about some of the most inspirational parts to me from his life, his friendships and his relationships, and what that means to me and what that can mean to all of us as we go through a trying time as people together. So have a seat with me, and we will sit with Mr. Tallmadge and talk a bit about him. So Mr. Tallmadge was born in the 1750s, and he was born in Long Island, New York, near a town called East Hampton. I think that grows me some favor already for him and perhaps with him, as I'm from East Hampton, Connecticut. So I'll take what I can get with that. And he grew up in a region known as Setauket. But his family had Connecticut roots. His father, namely, was from Connecticut and had gone to school in Connecticut. Sorry, there's some sirens going on, but hopefully you can still hear me. I'm going to give them a moment. Just breathe. So his father being from Connecticut and having Connecticut roots, and his father having gone to Yale and New Haven, was a big point of influence for Benjamin, who had grown up valuing education and really loved learning. It seemed natural to him that he would go to Yale too, and that is what he did when he was a teenager. We look back on university and think that they were going when they were 18 or 19, but they were more 15 or 16, the young men that attended university. And he went to Yale, and when he arrived at Yale, he befriended someone that became near and dear to him as a comrade that he would come to admire and that would come to admire him. And who he befriended was a gentleman named Nathan Hale from Coventry, Connecticut. Nathan Hale was one of a dozen children, and only a couple of his family had been able to go to Yale, and Nathan seemed a natural student as well. So the two hit it off right away. They also both came from staunchly American and patriot families. And so when they graduated, it was shortly thereafter that the Sons of Liberty and the growing talks to start the Continental Army and the American Revolution had begun. Benjamin was the first to join. He immediately joined the Continental Army and would begin a long career of rising the ranks in that army. Nathan Hale wasn't so quick to join, having been a school teacher, but after correspondence with Benjamin Tallmadge, he decided that he would join the Continental Army as well. And they were not in the same regiment, but they did correspond via letters to each other and maintained their friendship and their inspiration, at least from 1775 to 1776. In 1776, many of you know the story of Connecticut's state hero, the martyr, the spy. And how did this happen? Well, Nathan Hale volunteered to be a spy for the Patriot Army, went into New York, was captured by one Robert Rogers and several other British officers, and was ultimately executed in September of 1776. This word immediately gets back to Mr. Tallmadge that his friend and his comrade had passed, and this ultimately became the first spy story of the American Revolution. Benjamin Tallmadge, of course, was distraught, but he wasn't someone to just sit in his mourning or his grief. He was someone to take a bad situation and make something of it. Some would say he maybe avenged Nathan. Others would say he was inspired by Nathan to make the system better, and to tell both their stories and to win the war. These young 20-something-year-old men were highly motivated, but they believed in an independent country from Britain. They believed in freedom, they believed in equality, and they believed this was possible, and they knew that General Washington would help lead them. Benjamin Tallmadge had ultimately become George Washington's right-hand man during the war. And many people who have watched the Hamilton musical may argue that Alexander Hamilton was George Washington's right-hand man, but I would ultimately argue entirely differently. Benjamin Tallmadge was the military and intellectual mind that was right at George Washington's side and is responsible for so much, not the least of which, other than his military combat and aiding General Washington, was creating a spy ring. And I believe ultimately inspired by his good friend and the loyalty from that. The spy ring is one that you may be familiar with in today's day and age called the Culper spy ring. And it was built utilizing his friends from Setauket, Long Island, most notably Caleb Brewster, who was a fiery personality who would always sail across Long Island Sound delivering the messages. And he too would end up settling in Connecticut in an area named Bridgeport at the conclusion of the war. So he develops this spy ring, and he doesn't do so lightly. It was Benjamin Tallmadge who created the entire dictionary that they would use. Dictionary, you may ask? By that I mean cipher, so that they could communicate in a secret language that Tallmadge helped to develop and orchestrate. He was so good at keeping the spy ring secret, even the documentation in his life about it is very limited because he wanted to protect those who were in the circle, and not everyone knows who was. If you have had time to watch Netflix and you have been turned on to a show called Turn, Washington Spies, and I have the book here that it was based on, Washington Spies by Alexander Rose. It shows a very in-depth look at what the Culper spy ring was believed to be like. There is, of course, creative license, some of it dramatized, but there is a lot in here, and there's a wonderful portrayal in the book and in the series of Benjamin Tallmadge and his bravery. So that's something, if you're stuck in quarantine, or even if you're not, I recommend that you watch Turn, Washington Spies and really get a feel for Tallmadge and the time and become immersed in what was going on. What was the ultimate success of Tallmadge's military career and spy career? Some may argue It was the inevitable capture of British spy John Andre, the man who was believed to have turned Benedict Arnold himself, another Connecticut native from Norwich Way, who had been a revolutionary patriot hero, and then quickly and abruptly turned sides. Even when Benedict Arnold turned sides after he too was close to Washington and had won battles in Litchfield and the like, he went to Benjamin Tallmadge via letter, wrote him a letter, and begged that Tallmadge join the Redcoat Army with him, that he would be a great aid, and tried to demonstrate this allegiance that he had to the Redcoat Army that he thought Tallmadge and his friends would agree with. Tallmadge was horrified by this letter, but wanted to reply in as best a manner as possible, and he believed that was to be not replying at all. And instead he drafted a letter to General Washington and said, "I received this letter and I will respond if you wish, but I have nothing to say to this man." Mr. Washington believed that that moment where he read that letter from Mr. Tallmadge proved without a doubt his unquestioning and undying loyalty to the cause and to the people he cared about. That moment was defining for them as people as much as it was in their career. After the turning of Benedict Arnold, and around this time, it was the perfect time to capture the British gentleman at the center of it all, the one who had been heading their spies and had been a big part of their army, and that was a gentleman named Major John Andre. Major John Andre was beloved by men and women alike. He was a ladies' man. They believed him to be a man of great charm and quite handsome, and men believed him to be a true gentleman. Never would he slide an insult or speak out of turn, and he talked to everyone with respect, no matter where they came from. And that made it hard to find out that he was ultimately such a culprit behind the British attacks on the Patriot Army. So it was a debate. Should John Andre, when captured, be kept in jail for a certain amount of time and that be it? Should he be sent back home to England and told never to return? Or should he too be executed, like Nathan Hale was hanged in the middle of New York? Most people advocated that John Andre was many things, good or even bad, but he was not deserving of execution. He was a true gentleman, and George Washington even had sleepless nights and said ultimately he didn't know how they could execute Andre. But there was someone who advocated for Andre's execution, even though it hurt his heart as well. And that was Benjamin Tallmadge. He said it was something that was one of the hardest things he had to do, but he knew ultimately that that was what the price was paid when you were disloyal. And I want to read to you a little excerpt from the memoir of Benjamin Tallmadge. This is a memoir written by him, in addition with letters from his collection over the years. And he wrote something many years after Andre's execution, which Washington did end up supporting, about his ride with Andre to the execution and bringing it back to Nathan Hale. And I'll read to you that excerpt. As we progressed on our way to Tappan before we reached the Clove, where we dined, Major Andre was very inquisitive to know my opinion as to the result of his capture. In other words, he wished me to give him my opinion as to the light in which he would be viewed by General Washington and a military tribunal if one should be ordered. I endeavored to evade the question, unwilling to give him a true answer. When I could no longer evade this importunity, I said to him that I had a much-loved classmate in Yale College by the name of Nathan Hale, who entered the army with me in the year 1776. After the British troops had entered New York, General Washington wanted information respecting the strength, position, and probable movements of the enemy. Captain Hale tendered his services, went into New York, and was taken just as he was passing the outpost of the enemy, said I, with emphasis on, "Do you remember the sequel of this story?" "Yes," said Andre. "He was hanged as a spy, but you surely do not consider his case and mine alike." I replied, precisely similar, and similar will be your fate. He endeavored to answer my remarks, but it was manifest he was more troubled than I had ever seen him before. That excerpt right there, and you can read it with the other letters, where he does pay great respects to John Andre as a person, shows that ultimately at Tallmadge's heart is friendship and loyalty, and doing in your heart what you believe to be right for those that you care about most. And that was defining for Tallmadge. It was defining in that capture of Andre. It was defining and developing a spy ring that would catch so many British spies and thwart so many of their efforts, and ultimately help the Patriot Army. His friendship with General Washington, who he grew in great affection for, was an inspiration. And without him, I don't know if George Washington would have been the same leader. I think that he was integral to not just the war, but to the shaping of this country. And he had his cross to bear. He documents later when he came home to Litchfield and had a great relationship with his wife and raised their children, that he struggled with some of the things that he had seen and witnessed. But that did not stop him. He worked to build a community and to be with friends. And he became involved in the local church and worked his way into being a leader in the church. He developed local merchant shops and farmlands and employed people and ran the shops, and almost half of Litchfield may have been Tallmadge's at one point. He was about that entrepreneurship, starting from scratch and making what is yours. He just maintains his relationship with George Washington throughout those years. And if you drive through Litchfield, you may pass his house. It's a stately home. Not all of the property remains, but the main home does. And when you pass it, you may look at it and say, wow, that looks remarkably like Mount Vernon in Virginia, Washington's home. It's not a coincidence. They stayed in touch. He loved Mount Vernon, and he had his home structured to look the same way with the pillars at the front. I know that we're going through a trying time right now. And when we go through a trying time, we look to the people around us, and we look to the people who came before us. One of the people that I go to in my mind when I'm going through a trying time and need motivation, inspiration to carry on, trudge forward, and honor all that I care about, including people, is Benjamin Tallmadge. His devotion to his friends and his loyalty and his motivation to just keep making things better and keep going through and to never stop trying is something that motivates me personally, but motivates me especially now, and I hope it motivates you. One of the reasons we came to Benjamin Tallmadge to be the first in our Cemetery Saturday series is because of what he represents and what he can help us with. I encourage you to talk with him, read about him, be inspired, value and hold close the people you love. That friendship and that family, that's what mattered, and that's what got him through, and that's what will get us through. And I know that in my heart, and he'll help us find that way. And entrepreneurs, you can talk to him too. I know we're going through a hard time, but friendship, family, motivation, Tallmadge is all of those things, and he brings that to us. Before I turn off today, I want to just read to you Tallmadge's farewell to his good friend Washington, reminding us of what matters and reminding us of friendship. And I'll read to you a little excerpt from that letter. In the calm retirements of domestic life, may you continue to enjoy health and find increasing satisfaction from the reflection of having conducted the arms of America through a war so peculiarly distressing to the obtainment of an honorable peace, and of having been the instrument under God in obtaining the freedom and independence of this country. Adieu, my dear General, and in every situation of life, I pray you to believe that my best wishes will attend you, and that I shall continue to be, as I am at this time, with every sentiment of respect and esteem, Your Excellency's most obedient and very humble servant, Benjamin Tallmadge. I will confess, when I've been reading these letters, when I did this earlier and when I do it now, I get chills behind me. And I don't think it's because it's a brisk April evening. I know that Tallmadge is standing there. It's almost like I can feel the ink coming from his pen and hitting the parchment and the words being delivered. And I hope in some way you maybe see the shadow of him standing behind me today and with us all. Remember, Tallmadge, send us your questions if we can answer any about him. I will tell you, we did briefly ask if we could put on the SLS camera before and did get a figure here, so we do know he's been about. I will be around. Send me your Tallmadge questions, your history questions, your cemetery questions. I will do my best to answer. We will continue our cemetery series every Saturday. If it's not me, it will be one of your other esteemed Seaside Shadows tour guides, hopefully talking about someone that's important to them and our ancestors and those who came before will get us through this, whether it's in our town, our state, our family, our country, our worlds. They're all standing behind us. I know that this is a free series and I want you to enjoy it and be able to have the spirits and history. If you can, I will ask each week, we will put up the Venmo address for the guide or historian that's telling your story when we make these posts. You're by no means obligated to, but if you are able to send any tips, that will greatly help us while we're unable to run our regular tours and programming at this time. Thank you, and keep Tallmadge in your heart, and we'll talk soon.